Welcome to the Master Tech Lou channel. I am Lou. In this video, I am going to try to give you the most thorough information on the Mercedes-Benz Airmatic air suspension system. It goes by Airmatic, it goes by rear self-leveling, rear level control, or ADS for active dampening system. But all in all, I'm going to be talking to you about the air suspension. Now, the car that I have here is a 2013 Mercedes-Benz ML63 AMG. The chassis is a 166, and it goes from, 2012 to 2018 or 19 before it turns to the 167 chassis. But what I'm going to teach you about the Airmatic system is going to work for all of the cars. I'm only going to be able to show you physically where things are on this car, but I'll try to do photos and Mercedes-Benz WIS information. WIS stands for Workshop Information System, to talk about the other cars. Diagnosing them is all going to be the same. The only difference is the physical location of the components, whether it be the compressor, the relay, the sensors, the acceleration sensors, the valves, the valve block. There's only a handful of things in these cars. I diagnose a lot of this stuff online at justanswer.com. My name is Lou Palomino. You can find me on the website if you need questions or need help. But ideally, the Airmatic system, when I find people online that need help or read forums, everybody's guessing at this stuff. If you watch any of my videos, I don't guess at anything. Let me take that back. I only guess when you have to guess. When nothing else makes sense and you got to pull the trigger on something, there are times you have to guess. So, but let me say that a majority of things that I do, or mechanics or actual technicians do, is we don't guess. We diagnose the failure, right? The problem with guessing is you start throwing parts at it, and now you don't even know if you have a good part. And if you don't know how the system works, how do you know what you're putting in is going to fix it, right? The common thing that you see is, my car is doing this, right? So you Google and all of a sudden it says, why replace this and it fixed my issue? So you go, oh, well, if it fixed yours, it's got to fix mine. I put that on there like, that guy's an idiot. It didn't fix mine. Well, no one said it would fix yours, right? What I try to do is I try to educate people on how to diagnose things the right way. And then I'm going to teach you my experience and how I do certain things. I don't want you to do what I do. I want you to take what I do and add that to your brain toolbox as to what you're going to do. Watch other YouTubers, right? Like Super Mario Diagnostics or Danner Scanner or Diagnose Dan. You know, they're very smart people, right? And they all say the same thing, right? It's like, you never know everything, right? So I don't want to get on a tangent, but I'm going to teach you about the Mercedes-Benz Airmatic system. If you follow along through the whole video, you're going to find things that are going to help you, right? And this will transfer over to the Porsches or the Jaguars, the Land Rovers, or the Bentleys. Air suspension systems typically all work the same. Maybe the software is a little bit different, so it raises and lowers at different points while you're driving. But ideally, to diagnose certain things, you're either not getting enough air, you don't have power to the system, you have a bad sensor, a bad connection, or a leak. There's only so many things in the system, right? But I'm going to show you how to figure out what the problem is, depending on the issue that you have. And I'm going to try to do this systematically with the video in steps, right? As to how I would approach not only diagnosing the issue, but the common failures that people out there in the world happen to see. Now, from my experience, so you know my experience, I've been a Mercedes-Benz dealer technician since 1999, 2000. I was trained by Mercedes over in UTI in Glendale Heights, Illinois. And then I worked in Rochester Hills, Michigan for about a year and a half, 2 years. Then I moved to Lober Motors in Lincolnwood, Illinois, and I worked there for about 4.5 years. Then I moved down to Peoria, Illinois, and worked for what was Sudes and then became Auto House of Peoria for the last, I don't know, since 2006. And then I did off and on because anyone in the car world keeps trying to get out of the car world, right? But this is what I know, this is what I do, and I'm going to continue to work on these cars, teach, help people, and educate them. So that's what my goal is today for this video. No fancy editing, no fancy sound effects, nothing to try to keep you engaged. If you want to learn, just watch the video, right? I'm going to show you what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do stuff, and it's going to help you figure out your car and or a buddy's car, whatever. We'll see, right? Now, right off the bat, the left front is down, okay? Doesn't take a genius to see, and I don't have to really measure anything. when you're looking at the car, the left front is down. All right. In fact, the right front might have went down because of the, nope, it did not. So it's pretty good. All right. All right. First, let's start with the messages you're going to see on the dash. All right. There's going to be Airmatic Visit Workshop. When that message comes on, there's nothing you can do without a scanner. All right. I'm going to tell you right now, anyone that tells you to replace something by just looking at that warning says Airmatic Visit Workshop is not doing you justice. Okay. There's no way to know why the computer is not letting the system work until you use a scanner and read the fault codes from the Airmatic control module or the level control module or the ADS module, even the ABC if you have hydraulic suspension. Whatever I teach you with this Airmatic stuff is going to be pretty much the same thing for the ABC stuff, right? So what's going to happen is when you have an Airmatic malfunction on the dash, it is not going to let the system work. I don't care what you're going to tell me. You can be like, well, Lou, I hear the compressor coming on. I don't care. It's not going to let the system work how it should work if that warning's on the dash, all right? So step one, if the dash says Airmatic Visit Workshop, you have to have a scanner that's an all-system scanner to read the codes from the Airmatic control module, all right, or whatever air suspension module name you got in your car, okay? Two, stop vehicle too low or stop vehicle lowered. All that's telling you is the car is lower than it is programmed for, and the compressor should be filling it up, all right? So stop car too low doesn't mean there's an error. It just means the car's too low. Now, if the car's been sitting for a long time and the air and the temperature outside dropped drastically, it's going to change the air pressure in the struts, so they're going to lower a little bit. So anytime you start the car, you want to give it a good minute or two. You'll hear the compressor come on, see if it raises up. Now, if it raises up and it goes off and a warning goes off, you're probably good to go, except if it does it every time you start the car. If you drive the car 4 times a day and every time you get in, it says stop too low, you got a leak and it's lowering. These things should hold air for a good amount of time. They shouldn't lower because of the air, right? The air shouldn't seep out of them. If it does and you got the whole car lowering or a corner leaning after 4 hours, 5 hours a day, that's not good, right? Typically, if the car is level and you shut it off, it should stay that level for a good 2-3 days, maybe 4, right? After that, depending on the temperature swings, will depend on if it lowers a little bit, okay? But if the whole car drops drastically fast, within a couple hours or overnight, even a corner, that's not good. So what we do is we take a measuring stick, all right? Let me turn this camera around. So what I do is I draw a square like this, all right? And I draw an arrow, meaning the front. I'll go to each corner and I'll measure it and I'll write down the measurement of that corner and I'll write down the time that I took the measurement and I'll check it every hour on the hour if I'm at work, or it doesn't matter, or wait a couple hours, right? So if you want a quick reading, check it every hour. If you wait a couple hours, it's not going to change any, right? It's not going to matter if you check it in 1 hour or 4 hours. If it's leaking, it's leaking. So I have a millimeter measuring stick, okay? So what you want to do is, from the center of the wheel line to the ground, all right, to the bottom of the fender lip, directly in line, you want to measure it. This is roughly 740 millimeters, right? Give or take 1 millimeter, so we'll say 740, just for video purposes. Now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to write 740, all right? And I'm going to check it every hour and see if it lowers. I'll do that to all 4 corners, okay? So if you got a corner lowering more than 10 millimeters at all, then you probably have a leak at that corner, right? I'm not telling you to replace anything. I'm just telling you probably have a leak. We're going to talk about how to figure out if you have a leak, all right? So that's warning number 2, which is stop car too low. That's a normal message if the car's physically low, right? The third one you're going to see is Airmatic vehicle rising. So essentially, if there's no warning that says Airmatic Visit Workshop, then the system should be working. Now in the SUVs, you have to have the hood down and all the doors closed, or else it's not going to raise or lower the car for safety purposes, right? In the cars, I haven't seen it not do that. I'll have to look at the information, so forgive me. I don't want to mislead you, but to be safe, always have the doors and everything closed, hood and everything. That way you know it's supposed to work. If it says aromatic vehicle rising, the compressor should be on, right? So you don't need a scanner for a majority of things. As long as the dash does not say visit workshop, you can figure this out without a scanner, right? So don't feel like you have to have a scanner. The scanner, it can help you, but it's not needed. You can find ways to diagnose this without the scanner as long as there's no warning on the dash. I'm sorry I'm going to be redundant because I want you to understand how this works and how to diagnose it, okay? The next message you're going to see is compressor cooling down. That is one of two things. One, you have a leak, or two, the compressor is weak. It's running too long. It's not reaching the level that it wants to in a certain amount of time, so it has to cool down. Now, if the only time that would be normal is if you're constantly loading or unloading the car, right? Because when you load the car, it lowers it. So then the compressor is going to have to kick on to build the pressure back up. There's a storage tank in these cars, and it uses the storage tank so that way the compressor doesn't have to keep coming on to add excess air. It'll take air from the storage tank and let it flow through to the struts to raise the car up and down, right? It'll take it from the struts, put it in the storage tank, and vice versa. So those are the messages you'll see on the dash regarding the aromatic system, all right? Now, what we're going to do now is talk about leaks. All right, the first thing I want you to know is how air comes into the system. There's an intake line, all right, in the ML and R class and GL. It's along the fender, all right? It's right there. It goes to a filter / muffler. Okay, it's a clear thing. My video's not focusing. Sorry. It's a clear thing, a clear filter, and it goes to the line, which goes to the front of the compressor. All right, see that line right there? Okay. So there's only one way in and one way out. When you hear the psh noise, what's happening is the compressor is compressing air. It's sending it out this line, past this valve, out this line to the valve block. The valve block is going to either open to each strut or the storage tank, depending on where it wants to put air. Once it's done, the valve block closes off, the compressor shuts off, this guy opens up, and whatever air is from here left to the compressor goes back out through the same intake. There's only one path in, all right? So now on the on the SUVs and some cars, if you see all these lines, then what's happening is the valve block is the only way into each bag. Compressor sucks in air, compresses it, valve block opens up, and then it goes to the struts. So if something's leaking, it's either leaking out of the strut or bag in the back, or the valve block sticking open and it's letting air pass back through there. My problem is this would also have to open up. These can stick. If you have an aromatic car that is stuck way high in the air, these valves stick and it's not letting the air escape. So it can't bleed it off. So the car just keeps raising, and it never goes and shoots out the air, all right? So what I'm gonna do is show you the top of the struts where these go in, and then also the bags in the back. All right, let me go to the back right now, actually. All right, so here's the bag in the back, and there's the air line up there, all right? There's the fitting. There's no electrical connection, all right? If you see an electrical connection on the bag, like you would see it on a E-Class or CLS, that means that the valve block lets air to the strut, and then the strut opens up to let the air in or out. So those are a little bit easier to diagnose, because if air is coming out of that strut, it can only come out two ways. Either the valve at the top is leaking or the bag is leaking. That's it. It should be closed off when the system's shut off, right? All right, I lowered the car. Now here's the line to the air struts in the front, all right? That's it. The valve block is what lets air into these shocks and bags. So once the valve block closes off, the car should not drop. If the car drops in any corner, it's leaking from one of these bags or struts or the line, all right? Now, if you want to tell if it's leaking from a line or the bag, you can just take this off. Just take the nut off, let the air shoot out, get an air gun, put it in a hole, pump it up with air, and hold it there, and let's see if it leaks down, all right? In fact, because this one over here is leaking, I could probably do it to this one, and we'll see it raise or lower or leak. However, if you go watch my Bentley video, I did it to the Bentley on the bench or on whatever, like a cart or something. I pumped it up with air to see where it was leaking from, and it was leaking from the fitting on the side. So in essence, finding leaks is very easy in these cars. Another trick that I do to find leaks. All right, because this sign was lowered, I can actually hear air escaping from this bag. So what you could do if you weren't sure if the bag is leaking, because the only time you hear air escape is if there's resistance, right? So if I just went, you kind of can't hear it. But if I went, you hear the air leaking, right? So if the hole's big enough, you're not gonna hear anything coming out of the airline. So what I do is, if only one corner is down and you don't have a rack like this at home, which whatever, no one really does, you can put a jack under this side, and when the compressor comes on, jack it up slow. Jack it up nice and slow. And when the compressor shuts off, it knows that it's where it wants to be. Loosen the jack, and then you'll hear it, you hear it leak out, and you'll hear it compress and come down. So that's an easy way to determine if A, the compressor is actually putting out pressure, or B, if the strut is leaking, right? That's one of the easiest ways to diagnose if the strut is leaking. You can try the soap and water method. I've never had that work for me because the other ways that I diagnose it tend to work. Plus, these bags usually have like a coating or protectant on there. Let me show you. The word is dust. They got a dust cap or dust bag, dust boot. All right, so you can't really see. What are you going to spray? What are you going to spray? You know, there's nothing to spray here. I'd have to take this down and then get to the actual bag that's in there to spray it and see what's happening. So, but I can hear it. So what I'll try to do is I'll try to pump it up with air, my air gun, to see if we can hear it leak. All right, trick of the trade. I took a spare tire tool and I used my torch to warm it up and I bent it. So now I have a nice 10 millimeter to get to these fittings at the top where a typical wrench won't fit. Let me show you. See it? Nice and easy. Of course, now it's not going to come loose. There we go. All right, there's also another tool that we use with these. I'll show you that guy. There it is. This guy. Show you the part number. 211-589-000900. Now this works is it's got a cutout. It's a 10 millimeter. It just goes over the line. Just like that. And then you can use a 10 mil to break it loose. But since I made this guy, I usually use that guy. All right, then once it's loose, you just spin it out. No air even came out of there. All right, so now I'm gonna get my air line. Man, I try to make good edits for you guys that do watch my videos. Takes a lot of time to edit this stuff, but at the same time, you know what? I don't want to miss anything that might intrigue you or might be beneficial to you. So we're just gonna do this step by step as I would in the shop, right? So it may be a long video, it may not be, but hey man, hope you learned something from this. So, all right, let me connect my air line. Okay, I got it connected. I'm gonna put it in there. Fill it up. All right, so I couldn't hear nothing leaking out of the bag, but I did hear it when I actually had the weight of the vehicle on there. But ideally, you can just use an air gun like that, push air into it, and see if you can hear air escaping from there, okay? Now, the other thing is, if you have a car where the compressor's running and it keeps saying cooling down, or you hear it running and it sounds really loud, compressors shouldn't be loud. They should be nice, low, gentle hum. And as long as all the mounts and springs are there, it should be pretty quiet. Let me show you the mounts and springs. So this thing hangs. It hangs by springs and rubber bushings, right? So as long as they're intact, you shouldn't really hear it. Now, if it's, even with the bushings in there, it's pretty quiet. But once these kind of wear, or maybe these studs rust and break off, you'll get some hellacious noise from here. But if this sounds like a coffee can with nuts in it or marbles, it's probably bad, all right? Even if it has a nice low hum, it could not be producing pressure, or this could be stuck open. So what I usually do is, you can take this line off here and put your finger over it. And when the compressor comes on, if you can keep your finger on that hole, the compressor's bad, right? If you're unsure if the valve block is working, you take the line off here, and when you start the car and it says rising, just hold your finger here. If it pushes your finger off, then that's a good indication you have a decent amount of pressure coming to it and there's a leak coming from the bag. So at least you know the valve block's working and it's allowing air to come to the strut, all right? Another common place besides bags and struts that are leaking is the actual compressor itself. The body, or the housing right here, somewhere in here can crack or split, and it'll just push out air through the body. There's a couple different styles of compressor. There's not too many, maybe 2 or 3, but I've seen them have hairline cracks and it pushes air out. So you can spray down the compressor with soap and water, right? And then you can spray down the valve block. Now, what symptoms of the valve block are if the car doesn't raise at all, or if the whole front or whole rear or whole car lowers, it's usually a valve block sticking open. How can you tell if the valve block is sticking open or closed? Well, one, if it says vehicle rising and you got no air going to the bags, you can either check it here by taking these off or check it at the bag or strut, whichever's easier. If there's no air coming out and it says rising, and it should be, then the valve block's probably bad. These have been known to stick, all right? What I do to see if the valve block's leaking to let it out let the air out, is I take this line off here and I put a rubber glove on there and I zip tie it, and you just watch the rubber glove. If the rubber glove starts blowing up, it means you got air coming out of there, right? It can take 10 minutes, it can take 20 minutes, it can take an hour, but ideally no air should escape from this valve block because that's the only thing that lets air to the bags and struts and then back out to the car. So air is pressurized right up to here and it stops. So right now in all these other bags, if I take any of these lines loose, they should leak air except for the one I have loose because there's no air in there. But air should be ready right here. So the valve block is the only thing keeping the air in the system. So let's quickly recap over leaks. You got the compressor that puts air to the valve block. Okay, that should be a V. All right, then from the valve block, it goes to all 4 struts and bags, and then 1 to the storage tank. All right, so if there's a leak, you can only have a leak either at the part, at the fitting. The lines almost never, I can't tell you I've ever had a line, not saying it can't, but I have never had a line be the issue. You got the fittings on each side of the line, so the fitting from the valve block to the line. You got the valve block itself that could be leaking, letting air out to the compressor, or you can have the valve on the side of the compressor stick it open, which is letting air out the compressor. There's only a handful of things that can leak, right? Another test about leaks, or another test with leaks that I do is the car is always riding at the normal ride height, okay? If I get the car in the shop and I put it on the rack and I pick it up in the air and then I put the car back on the ground and the car is dropped on one corner, there's a leak in that bag. But the bellows, the bags that are in these, they fold over each other so it can hide the leak until you raise it up past the point to where it's actually seeping and leaking from, and then the air can escape out. So what I do too is when I get in the shop, I'll hit the raise button. And if it just keeps saying raising but never reaches the height, I'll measure the corners to see which one's raised and which one didn't. And that'll tell me an indication too which one's leaking. So if the customer says the driver's always dropping, but it didn't drop on me, well, you can try to make it fail by jacking the car up in the air or raising it up a little bit or loading the car or rocking the car. Sometimes you're going to rock it and you'll hear psh, 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 it'll squirt air out. So there's a couple different ways you can find leaks in the car. The trickiest one I had is, if you've seen any of my E63 videos, it's on my friend's, my buddy Ralph's E63 wagon. He had a leak at the left rear bag, and he heard the leak when it sat there. And every morning he'd start it up, and it would say, low, vehicle rising, whatever. So he bought a new bag from FCP Euro and put it back in, or put the bag in. And then within a day or two, it dropped again. And he goes, oh, it's got to be something else. If you know me and seen my videos, new parts do not mean good parts. His brand new bag from FCP Euro was leaking as well. And how I confirm that, which the way I diagnose is I have to be certain that I know that that's the problem. And I try to make it fail every which way possible, so I know 100% that's what I'm going to fix. So what I did was I took off let me turn this on. I started the car and I let it raise to normal. Then I took both rear airbag lines. Actually, no, I did not. So I took the lines first and I swapped them side to side, okay? Then I used my scanner to raise the car level, because if you let the car try to raise itself, now that the lines are swapped, it's reading sensors from the wrong side. I didn't want to blow the bag out. So I swapped the line from side to side, and then I used my scanner to manually raise it, and then I shut the car off, and I disconnected the battery. That way the car cannot mess with the suspension. And I let it sit there for an hour. After an hour, the same side lowered, which told me it's not the valve block, all right? And the bag was the only way in and out with air, because it has a solenoid on there. So the airbag should not have let air go to the valve block, and the valve block should have not let air out. So I took the valve block out of the equation and left the line switched on the bag, and it's still lowered. That's how I know it was the bag. I don't recommend switching the lines like I did unless you have a scanner to manually activate the side you switched it to, because you'll confuse, the car won't know. The car doesn't know you switched the line. So if it's trying to raise the right rear and the level sensor is not changing value, it's going to keep pumping air and pumping air and pumping air. It's going to blow the bag, right? So just understand what I did there, okay? So now on the compressor, it's pretty easy. Power and ground, that's all you got. We can make this thing jump all day long. Jumping the compressor does nothing but turns the compressor on. That's all it does. Jumping the compressor doesn't make the valve block open. So people will say, I jumped the compressor and the car still didn't raise. It's not gonna, because the car has to be on and it has to know that it has to raise, right? So you need a scanner to actuate this to let air come in and out. You might be able to use power and ground to jump the individual solenoids. I don't know, that's too much of a pain in the butt for me. Common problems with this is the connector will burn. They'll get loose and they'll burn in there. So you can have random compressor activation, right? So that's all that's there, is power and ground. Ground is the brown wire, power is the gray with white. Ground in our cars is always solid brown, right? In the Mercedes-Benz. This is your valve that opens to let air escape, right? It'll open and go and let out. There's a valve and a spring and diaphragm in there. Common problems here is right here where it bends, the wire breaks. Okay, so if you have, I'm going to go through another section of fault codes and what the common problems are, but I just want you to see the valve on the compressor itself. So the compressor is very simple. Compressor, you got the air intake line, sucks the air in. This is the output to the valve block. The valve block opens and closes to let air to the bags. Very simple, all right? Don't let this intimidate you. It's very simple. It's too simple. The system is so simple. It's so simple that people misdiagnose it because they overcomplicate things, all right? So that's as far as I think I can talk about leaks. Common leaks in the SUVs, the bags will blow out. The rear airbags will blow out. They're pretty, ideally, if you have a corner dropping, it's going to be a bag leaking, right? If you have a corner not raising, even with a new bag, I've had a valve block fail while the car was in the shop. It was in the shop. I put bags on it. I go to start it up. It wouldn't raise. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. What did I do? I use a scanner. Nothing's happening. You don't even hear it clicking, right? Hit it a couple times with a hammer. All of a sudden it starts clicking. Something in the valve block went bad while I was on the rack. So ideally to me, anytime you change a bag or a strut, you may want to put a new valve block in there. And to me, I would say the dealer parts are the best. It was a dealer part that I put in. It was a reman valve block from the dealer, and they don't make new ones for some cars. It's remanufactured. So I essentially put a bad part in a car one time as well. I might even have a brand new valve block here in my toolbox. Let me see. Yep. There it is. This thing wasn't a few months old when it failed. So, all right, so I hope that covers it about leaks. I'm trying to think of anything I left out. If you have a question, leave it in the comments, and I'll make a follow-up video if I need to, because I really want to be thorough on this. And I'll tell you that when you're recording a video, you brain fart. You know what I mean? Like I'm trying to focus on showing you things, so I'm trying to take my time and not overlook anything. So let's talk about uneven level, all right? I'll tell you right now, if I hear the word level calibration, I'm going to lose it. I get so angry internally because people enter level calibration because they think it's going to fix something. Level calibration doesn't fix anything. The only time I've ever done it is when I do alignments and the customer has a request for lowering the car a little bit, but it's really even hard to do that the right way without lowering links. So to me, lowering links fix things, and making sure that all the parts are in the right position fixes things, and I'm going to explain that. So right now we're going to talk about the level adjustment and why level can be off, right? Here we go. So on almost all cars, you have 4 level sensors. Here is the passenger front level sensor mounted to the body, all right? Look right here, this is very important. This pin, see it sticking through? That pin is on a bracket, which essentially, when it's mounted there, it's in the spot it needs to be, okay? And there's an arm. The arm goes to the upper control arm, which is mounted into its right hole. So if anything is messed up here, you're gonna get the wrong level. The sensor's gonna report back 2 volts. The computer's gonna say, hey, I'm happy with that, but the actual level is off. These corrode a lot. When these corrode, this cheap plastic, look, I can flex it, right? I can flex this plastic. A metal rod is better. I don't know why they use plastic. What happens is these can corrode, and when they bind, the car can raise, but this can be bent or squeezed. So what it does is it moves the arm faster or slower, right? So like if it's bent, the arm is already moved to where it shouldn't be. If it's extended, the arm is moved to where it shouldn't be. I can flex the arm, right? So if this arm is supposed to be here, but it's down here, and this is bent, you're gonna get the wrong level, all right? So the first thing I do is I do the Q-tip test. I call it Q-tip test, where if I can spin this in my fingers, nice and easy, then this is pretty good. So here's the passenger front. Here's the driver's front, okay? That one's got a little bit of bindy. Not sure I'm happy with that. All right, level sensor, it's located in the bracket correctly. We'll go to the rears. Here's the rears. All right, mounted to a bracket. It's bolted in a spot, and there's a locating tab. I'm not gonna be able to see it. I'll try to get a better photo. There's a tab that it sits in. Okay, so this has to be in a specific spot. Now notice on this SUV, the rear level sensors, they're facing the bags. All the time, I get people that say, I put brand new bags in the rear and my car doesn't raise. What do I do now? Well, what happened was they took this loose and now the arm is over here. So the arm's not reading the right way. Now you're gonna get fault codes or the wrong level, right? And here's what I was talking about, the airbag, how it folds under itself. This bag will just extend up. See the clean spot? That's where it normally rides. I put it up in the air so it extended a little bit. So ideally it could show a leak if this were leaking. But, so you have 4 level sensors, 1 in each corner, except cars might only have 3, and the third one's gonna be up on the differential in the sway bar, all right? But we're sticking with the SUV for right now. Oh, same thing with the rear, sorry. These a little bit more sealed and a little bit more sturdy. I can't really rotate this. So it's a little bit more of a sturdy socket. I'm not sure I'm happy with that. I might want to replace those or just try to squirt some grease in there, all right? But a lot of times what happens is if the front level's off, especially on a 164, these are corroded and they're stuck, so it's twisting this, all right? So, trying to think of what I should explain next with the level sensors, all right? All right, we're gonna talk about level sensors. Left front, left rear, right rear. Shouldn't I drink that energy drink? Now, when the level sensor is connected, and here's the arm, okay? What you're going to see on a value in any scanner you look at is the range is going to be from 0.00 to 5.00. All right, 0.00 to 5.00. Same thing here. And what that is volts. The sensor's getting power and ground in 5-volt reference, and depending on where the arm is at, depends on how much voltage is coming out. Now, I will tell you that almost all Mercedes, when they're perfectly level, you're going to get 2.5 volts here, 2.5 volts here. They're going to equal 5, okay? If you add the sides together, 2.5 and 2.5, you're going to get 5 volts. Now, when this arm is down, we'll say, just for example, this may be a max of 5 volts. But when this arm is down, because they use the same sensor, they're just reversed, you're going to get a max of 0 volts. This is actually flipped. So when this is raised all the way, you're going to get 0 volts. And when this is raised all the way, you're going to get 5 volts. So either way, it's going to equal 5. If this side shows 1.75, this side's going to show 2.25. They're going to equal 5, as long as the sensors are in the right spot and it's mounted the right way, all right? When people try to level calibrate, you can level calibrate to 2.5 volts on each sensor. And then when it asks you what degree to put in, we'll say it'll be 1.2 degrees to 1.0 degree, we'll say. What I do is I put it right in the middle. So if it's only 0.2 difference between 1.2 and 1.0, I'll put the spec at 1.1 and the sensor at 2.5. So when I go to calibrate it, it's happy with that, right? Now, if you have the level and the level's off, all you have to do, this is things I've learned over time. All you have to do, if let's say this car or this side is 0.5 millimeter compared to the other side, but the level sensor is the exact same voltage, or it's making 5 volts compared to the other one, just tweak the bracket, all right? You can take this and bend it a little bit, and it changes the position of the arm. Same thing with if I loosen this nut, or even loosen the sensor and move the sensor into bracket, I can change the position of the arm, and then the module is going to raise or lower the car to make that happen. So I never entered level calibration to fix a ride height issue. I took a pry bar and I tweaked the bracket, because normally what happens is people replace parts and they take it off the control arm, or they don't put the bracket back on, or sorry if that's bright, or the body got damaged, or something moved, right? So it's not in the same position. The car doesn't lose calibration. When you put a strut in there, a strut doesn't change the physical dimensions of the control arms and stuff. Now the control arm may, but all you have to do is match it again, right? So you don't really need to do level calibration. And when you enter level calibration, it will lock out the system from working, and there will be no fault codes on the dash. But when you read it with a scanner, it'll say level calibration not complete, all right? So be very careful about that. All right, so to recap, the levels being off, a majority of time, either the sensor's not in the right position, the bracket's not put in the right, which happens a lot on S classes and E classes. It's very important that when you take off a control arm or something, you got to look at the bracket. The bracket has located, the bracket mounts one way. The bracket has to go back in the place that it needs to be, or else the sensor's going to be off, right? So anytime you have a level discrepancy, it's usually the mounting of the sensor, all right? So I think I took care of it for the levels being off. Again, if you got questions, hit me up in the comments. I'll make a follow-up video if I forgot anything, okay? But take a chance to subscribe, hit me up with a super thanks if you want to send me a cup of coffee or whatever. But let's now talk about the next thing. All right, we're going to talk about fault codes, all right? There's only so many things in the system, so I'll explain to you what the fault codes mean for each of them. Not every fault code, but the fault code for the part, right? So if you have a fault code with a level sensor, saying electrical circuit, circuit means the wiring, all right? So here's the sensor. There's only 3 wires. There's a power, there's a ground, and there's a signal return, right? So you'll have to check these wires to the module, not the whole wire physically, but with using a meter to ohm it from the connector to the module that's in this car underneath the seat. But anytime you have electrical circuit issue with the sensor, it's possible the sensor's bad, or corrosion on the pins, or bad wiring. The only way to determine that is you can ohm the sensor, and if you know how to ohm sensors and see if it's getting different resistance back as the arm moves up and down, right? You can check the actual value with the scanner, see if the scanner shows voltage. If it doesn't show any voltage, sorry, I talked too fast. If it doesn't show any voltage, you know you might have a problem with the signal wire, right? But codes that have to do with circuits, that means the wiring to the part or the part itself. It's not getting the signal back that it needs to see, all right? So level sensor codes do not mean replace a level sensor, right? It's rare to have one go bad. They do go bad, but it's rare. I can't tell you I've ever replaced one myself. I've helped people that need to replace them, so I'm not saying that you don't need them, but I'm saying is don't just blindly replace a sensor. Now, since the sensors are the same from side to side, unplug it, unscrew it, put it on the other side, just plug it in. See if the code changes. If the code changes to the other side, you know you have a bad sensor, right? They use the same sensors for all 4 corners. They're just mounted on different brackets, right? Now, if you have a code for the dampening system or the solenoid valve or the, let me see what it says on a computer here. The dampening valve, when you push the shock button and it lights up red once or twice, depending on the car, you're changing the dampening characteristics of the shock. How that does it is there's a solenoid valve, or a solenoid, which is a valve on the side of it. Let me turn this around here. This is the solenoid. This guy allows the air to come in and out from the shock, or the fluid, whatever's in there, to dampen differently. So this wire here wraps around, plugs in up here with the ABS sensor and or brake wear sensor, depending on what you got. So what you have to do with these guys is unplug this guy here and ohm. There's only 3 pins. There's a shared ground. There's a shared power. And then there's a ground activated for depending on what valve. There's 2 valves in there, so there's 3 wires. Again, there's a shared ground and then individual powers to activate it. So you can ohm and compare it to the other side. And how to unplug this is you just push in this metal wire here. This guy here. Let me get in there. Pushing this wire here. And when you push it in, it releases it. And you can pull these guys out. All right, I'm not doing it now, but that's how you get that out of there. So when it has to do with the valve, the dampening valve, this is what it's talking about here, this guy here, all right? It's on every front shock, and then there's not anything on the rear bags, but it's on the rear shock, okay? So you can have a bad rear shock, and it's not gonna let the aromatic system work because it doesn't know if this valve is good or not, so it won't let the compressor kick on and it won't raise the car. Has nothing to do with the bag, right? The bag could be hunky-dory, sensors could be fine, but if you have any issues with any of these dampening valves, it's not gonna let the system work. So when it refers to dampening valve, that's what it's talking about, and the issue is almost always the dampening valve. Rarely is it the connection, unless somebody just worked on it and they didn't plug it back in, all right? Now, when you have a fault code with a level control valve, it's talking about the valve block. This is your level control valve. This is the valve block that lets the air in and out to control the level. It's a fancy word. I don't know why it just didn't say valve block. Some of them say air distribution valve, right? Some fancy term for it. But when it has something to do with a compressed air valve, it's usually talking about the valve block. Those are tricky to diagnose. You're either ohming all the wires from the valve block to the module, or just plug it into a valve block, right? That's one of those times where we call it test fitting a part. It's only guessing if you leave it in there and charge the customer for it, right? But it's the fastest way. If you know you have a good part, just plug it in and see if the code goes away, because you can apply 12 volts to the solenoids to see if they click. It's just kind of a pain in the butt to do that. So it's sometimes quicker just to grab a new one and plug it in to see if that takes care of it. And most times it does, unless you know there's a wiring issue or there's been damage up there with the wiring. So let's see what other codes we got. Now, when you got a code for an acceleration sensor, there's typically 3 in the car, 2 in the front, 1 in the rear. What that is it knows when the car is accelerating or slowing down, like a G-force kind of a thing. So it knows to actuate like the stabilization for like a roll, like a sway bar, right? So it uses ABC or the Airmatic to lock the valves to keep the car from dipping. It keeps it nice and straight. And same thing when you're driving on a curve on an exit ramp, it locks it because it knows the swaying and acceleration, right? So I believe this one actually, let's see if I can see it down here, uses, I don't know if you can see it down there, this guy, that airbag acceleration sensor, because I can't find it in the wiring diagram for Airmatic. So I think it uses the acceleration sensor for the airbag, but most times it's mounted to like the strut tower. You'll see in some cars the 3-wire sensor. It's nice and flat. I'll show you a picture. So that's the acceleration sensor for this car. I wonder if it shows part of the airbag or uses part of the airbag system for that to see the acceleration. I'll show you on the cars. Like on a 221 S-Class, that's how the sensor would look. It's always mounted flat, face up, and it's got an arrow on it showing which way it should face. But that's how an acceleration sensor looks. So if you got a code for an acceleration sensor, you can swap those side to side, or also you're checking the pins to see if they're damaged. If you got this fault code for the pressure relief valve, that is the one I was telling you about already. This guy here. This wiring usually breaks in here. Just give a tug on it if it comes apart. But if you got a code for this, either this valve is open circuit or the wiring is broken here. And this is pretty simple. I believe it sends out like a 9-volt testing signal to see if there's a connection or continuity there. And then it'll actuate the valve. So you can actuate it by applying 12 volts to it. It should make a pop noise. But the wire in here usually breaks. All right, if you got these codes about actuation, the compressor has a malfunction, it knows that when the system's activated in the compressor, if the pressure doesn't change, that's how it knows if the compressor is actually working or not. So you may have a code for the compressor malfunction. If you got codes about level outside of tolerance, that's usually normal when the car's lowered. It's obviously out of tolerance, right? So you'll see those as fault codes sometimes. The time for filling the compressed air reservoir was not attained. That's usually a weak compressor or a dead compressor, not putting out enough air. And this knows if it's leaky, if it constantly has to kick on the compressor. If it's constantly kicking it on to fill up air, it knows that it's leaking, right? So it's rare you would see these codes, but it does happen. And then this is when you enter calibration mode. On top of that, it makes me very angry again with the calibration mode because calibration mode doesn't fix anything. So that's basically it for the fault codes. Anytime you have a fault code that has to do with the circuit, it means that the wiring is the issue. And by wiring, I don't mean the wiring. I mean the signal from the module that comes out is not getting back to it, or it's recognizing a short on the wire. It may be testing the amperage draw, right? There's many different ways that it determines a circuit. So you'll have a short to positive, a short to ground, an open circuit, or just a general circuit failure. What I like to do is unplug whatever the code is for. So if it says right front valve, unplug the valve. See if the code changes. If the code doesn't change, then you know it's no different than being unplugged. It's probably a bad valve, right? Or the wire to it. Like, don't replace anything based on what I'm teaching you here, okay? So the only way to confirm is to test your signals at the connector, right? As far as fault codes, basically what I was getting at was anytime it has to do with a circuit, you're checking an actual part and the wiring to the part, all right? If you just replace the part, do not think that the new part is a good part. I've had plenty of bad parts, brand new, for air suspension, which is my next section, parts. Back in the day, and by back in the day, I mean, I don't know, 10 years ago, when I became aware of R-Not Industries, their quality was very good. Now, it's hit or miss. And I don't even know if they're doing the work, right? So I'm not saying they're a bad company, nothing like that. What I'm saying is when you order a part and it's remanufactured, oh man, anytime we have the ability to mess something up, we're going to do it, right? That's what humans do. I've had so many bad new parts. It's unbelievable. Valve blocks are #1 culprit for being new and bad. Compressors, number 2 culprit for being new and bad. Air struts, they're hit or miss. If they're bad, it's typically the electrical wiring for those solenoid valves. Air bags with the solenoid valves on top, those are pretty bad too. They're hit or miss. So when it comes to parts, if your diagnosis led you to the part and you put the new part in it and you have the same failure, just stop. Don't say, well, it can't be that. Start your diagnosis again, right? If it led you there the first time, make sure it leads you there the second time. I already told you about my buddy Ralph's E-Wagon that I had to replace a bag in it, and he was yelling at me, it's new, it's brand new. Like, you've been in the business with me just as long, but now that it's his money, you take on a different mentality, right? Like, it can't be the new part, I just paid for it. So one symptom I've had from R-knot struts is specifically in cars. The strut would raise up too high, and then the customer wants to just figure out what's going on and they want to change it. They let the airline loose and the strut doesn't lower. If there's no valve on the strut and you know that the valve block is the only way in and out from the strut, that strut extended and something inside came loose and now it's stuck up there. Mechanical internal failure. I've had that happen a lot of times, especially on S-classes. For some reason, I don't know how they're rebuilding these things, but that's a huge problem with the aftermarket struts. So you pay a pretty penny for these things and they're still garbage, right? I don't recommend people converting to coilovers. That's just my personal opinion. You're taking a car and now you're adding all aftermarket stuff to it. It's not going to drive the same or feel the same. I don't know. So to me, I'd rather fix it the right way. And I would always prefer dealer parts, but at the same time, we're getting dealer reman parts and they're still junk. I don't know who's rebuilding these things, but they're hit or miss. So be careful where you buy your parts, right? Don't choose the cheapest. Choose the ones with the best reviews or the best return policy or warranty. I am more comfortable with a return policy and warranty than I am reviews, because the only people that make reviews are the people that are angry at life. They just want to complain about something, right? You never hear positive reviews about, hey man, this strut fixed my day. No, it did not. It's like, oh, your company's garbage, I hate you, whatever. So that's what I want to talk about parts, is just make sure you make the best decision possible when you buy the parts, all right? Don't skimp out on it because it's just suspension. It's your safety at hand, right? Don't chintz out on something like that, all right? So let's go on to the next section. I guess the one thing with parts that I just remembered is that there's been a lot of times where you order a brand new strut and you get the strut, you go to put it in and they sent you the wrong side. Quite a few of our cars, they're ambidextrous, meaning both sides are the same, they're just turned around. But some of our cars are specific to a left front and a right front. So before you put the part in, open up the box and compare it to the other one before you even take the other one apart, just to get an idea, to make sure, so that way you're not taking, the car out of service, or like it's down on the rack or it's stuck in your garage for a couple days. Because it's been a huge issue with quite a few companies out there where you get the struts in and they either give you two of the same part number in the same boxes, or they give you the right box with the wrong part inside of it. So be very careful of that one too, all right? All right, in regards to the level sensors, here's the voltages, all right? So what I'm going to show you is how little movement it takes to affect these. Let me line this up here. All right, so there's the sensor and the bracket and the arm and the right front. All I'm going to do is push on this gently, all right? So watch the right front. Okay, see how it moves? I'm talking gently. I am barely pressing this thing, just enough to get it to move, okay? So now if this thing was stuck and it flexed a lot, that voltage change matters a lot, all right? Especially if it was bent inwards, if I flex it to bend inwards. Now what's going to happen is that car is going to raise or lower to try to make the voltage what it needs to be, which is going to cause uneven level, all right? And see these back values? Both arms are facing the same way, but notice how one is higher voltage than the other one. I can't compare the front because my left front strut has no air in it, so the thing is shorter than it should be, so the readings aren't going to be right. But that's what I was talking about, how when the sensors are facing the same way, but because they're reversed, one voltage is going to be high, the other voltage is going to be low. Now, these don't have to make 5 volts, right? I was just using it as an example. When the car is level, it's typically about 2.5 volts. All right, now we're going to get into the fun stuff. We're going to talk about the compressor. If the car says vehicle rising and the compressor is not coming on, now we have a problem with either the relay or the fuse blew, or the wiring to the compressor is melted or disconnected, or the compressor is bad. The fastest test is to jump the compressor to see if it kicks on. I'm gonna show you how to jump it. So in this ML, the compressor relay is relay T. And how you know what relay T is under the relays or next to it on the fuse box is a letter. I'll show you. Now, on a relay, there's smaller terminals and there's bigger terminals. Basically, power is waiting right here or right here, but we're going to say right here. Power is waiting right here. When the module grounds this, it connects power and ground across these two, and it activates the relay, which now lets power go from this terminal to this terminal. So anytime you're going to test the circuit here, I'm going to have 2 of them with power and 2 without power. So once the module grounds this relay, it's going to allow power to go across here. You know which ones they are that deliver the load because they're huge, all right? And on the bottom, there's numbers. It's either 87 and 30 or it's 3 and 5. You take a wire, it's one simple wire, and when you jump from 87 to 30 or 3 to 5, whichever numbers you see, the compressor is going to come on. All right. So if you jump it and the compressor comes on, but it's not coming on by itself, you either have a bad relay or the module is not activating the relay. And if the module is not activating the relay, it's probably in level calibration mode. Now, if you jump those terminals and the compressor does not come on, either the compressor is dead or the connection is burnt down at the wires. And the only way to check that is to pop off the connector, use a test light, and when you jump it, check to see if you have power down there. If you have power down there, then the issue is the compressor. Now, if you want, you can take power and ground from the battery or a 12-volt source, a jump pack or jumper cables. Just be careful. Use small wires and touch the terminals on the compressor and see if the compressor kicks on. If it does not, you know you have a bad compressor. But that's the fastest way to diagnose a bad compressor. Now, I will tell you, very important, if you have a bad relay or you think you have a bad relay, do not get these anywhere else but from the dealer, all right? There's a huge issue where people are buying these relays from like O'Reilly's or AutoZone, we'll say just aftermarket in general. They put it into the fuse block, and it's typically on the R class, the ML and GL from 2006 to 2012. It burns the fuse box. That relay has an extra terminal, and the terminal is used to short to ground to avoid voltage spikes. And when that relay goes bad, the diode fails and it shorts right to ground and it blows the ground strap inside of the fuse box. So if your complaint is that you just replaced your Airmatic compressor and relay and now your car only runs for 10 seconds, it's because every time it goes to activate the air compressor relay, it's killing ground to the rest of the control modules. So you need a new fuse block and you need new relays. So I have quite a few fuse blocks at home from dealing with this issue. There's 2 different versions of fuse blocks for those cars, so be very careful as to which one you buy. The part number that's on the side of it is not the part number of the fuse block. It's the part number of the upper part of the case. It's not the actual part of the fuse block, so be very careful. I know I say a lot. I got to stop that. But that's the easiest way to check the compressor to see. Now, to test the relay, you can just apply power and ground to the smaller terminals, and if it clicks, then you can ohm across the bigger ones to see if you got resistance. And if you do, you know, or very low resistance, you know it's working. If you got no resistance, then it's not working. So it's easier to just swap the relay with one of the other ones in the fuse blocks that are the same size and looks the same part number, and see if it starts. That'll tell you if you got a bad relay or not. But that's the fastest way to determine if your compressor is working as far as coming on. If it's putting out pressure, you can do that to test the pressure, right? Just jump jump the pins over here, take off the air line to the compressor and see if you can hold your finger over it or put a pressure gauge on there to see if you got pressure. These things put out 200 PSI or more, right, to fill up the airbag system. So if you can hold your finger over the hole, that's not you. It's a bad compressor. If you can't and it keeps pushing it off, I've never had one be slightly weak. It's either producing pressure or it's not. There's only one reed valve on the piston, and there's only one piston ring and one piston and one bore. It's not going to intermittently make pressure. It's either making pressure or it's not. You can either hold your finger over the hole or you can't. That's it. All right. So I hope that helps you diagnose your compressor issues. And again, where you buy the parts is very important, because I've had a lot of brand new compressors bad out of the box. So the first thing I do is I bench test it. I jump power and ground. I hold my finger over the port and see if it's pushing out good pressure. And if it is, I'm happy with it. I'll put it back in the car. Let's see what's next. All right, next we got the valve block. This is not from this car, but it might even be the exact same one. I didn't bother to check part numbers. I really don't care at the moment because they're all similar. When you have all these ports, you got one storage tank, then you got one inlet from the compressor. You'll have one storage tank, which I believe is this one, and then you'll have all four corners. Now, these are German acronyms. So if you Google and translate front right or front left or right rear or left rear, you'll get one of these, you'll see, Vorsich or Heinz or something like that. I butchered it, but they're color coded too on the actual lines. The lines have a color ring that match with these things, right? So what else is in here is the pressure sensor. So when you got a code for aromatic pressure sensor, it's in the valve block. There's nothing you're going to do. As long as the wires are good, which I have yet to have bad wiring to the valve block unless it's been in an accident and people repaired it, or it's been in an accident, it hasn't been repaired. That's the only time I have issues with wiring to the valve block. And at that point, you would have circuit codes, not valve failure codes, all right? So again, a test is unplug it and see if the same code pops up. If it doesn't, then you might be testing wiring or whatnot. There's not really much you can do here. If you pinned it out, as far as looking at the diagram to see what pins do what, you can apply power and ground, but from the most part, what I witness in these things is it's either all or nothing, right? So like either the whole front right and front left will be down, or the whole rear will be down, or the whole car doesn't raise, or the whole car doesn't lower, or there's an issue with the storage tank not being able to fill up. But the valve block's very easy to diagnose because air is not coming out of it. Air's going into it, but air's not coming out of it. Or it's stuck open and air's constantly coming out of it. And you know that because you can stand next to the car and keep your hand on it, and the car keeps doing this, raising and lowering, raising and lowering. The compressor keeps coming on, raising and lowering, and you hear this thing click. If you don't hear this thing click, it may not be actuating the valves, which the only reason it would not actuate the valves is if there was a fault code, all right? So diagnosing a valve block is pretty much, if everything else checks out in the car, the issue's the valve block, right? If you don't have a leak, if you don't have air coming to the struts, but you can pressurize the strut, that the compressor is coming on and the compressor is putting out pressure, then the issue's probably a valve block. I really don't like replacing parts unless they fail, but because I'm dealing with suspension, anytime I replace suspension parts, I put a new valve block in there and I keep the old one on hand just in case. But these are now a wearable item, where back in the day they would last forever, and then they started making them out of plastic, and we all know how that works out. So that's how to diagnose a valve block. All right, so I'm using my AnyScan A30M. I'm using it more and more just to see what it can do. But this is the guy that I have from Xtool, and this is not sponsored by anybody. I'm just showing you what I'm using on my iPad here. And I'm in the ADS module / aromatic module for this ML, and I'm going to show you what we see with the scanner. So let me back out. I go into chassis, I go into the ADS module. Come on, I know you felt me click it. The only thing we do there is you can get a part number off the module. Well, this one doesn't show it, of course, because I say that, but sometimes it'll show the part number, but it's basically the software. We don't need to go in here for anything. Read trouble code. I should have a trouble code for correction time when filling is too long. That's because the compressor is putting out air, but there's a leak, so it can't build pressure. So the strut is the culprit, and the strut is the reason why it's saying correction time when filling is too long, because it's trying to correct the level, all right? I don't want to clear the trouble code. We'll go to actuation test first. I'm just showing you what is in a scanner. In case you don't have a scanner, you know what you can do with the scanner. So with the Airmatic central reservoir filling valve, what that is in here, in the valve block, right? So if I go to that guy, it's the only problem with the Any-Scan is you got to keep touching it. So this is going to test. Okay, I heard the valve click. All it's checking is the amperage draw. That's how it knows if it's working or not. Maybe you heard it. Okay, so it's actuating the valve inside the valve block. For the central reservoir filling valve, it's basically a storage tank. Pressure release valve, that is that little valve on the side of the compressor that I was showing you. Okay, there's that poof of air you heard. And the air is already gone, so you're not going to hear it again. Aromatic relay. I know you can read, but just so you know where I'm at. Compressor kicks on. Okay. Move to calibrated level automatically. Now what happens here is when I start the car, and if I hit that, it's just going to raise the car to where it should be. The only reason I would use that is if I just put in new bags and new struts and I want to fill the car to the calibrated level fast. It's no different than just starting the car and letting it do its thing. I just hit that. If I did manually, I'm going to control it. Come on. There we go. So I'm going to control it through here, right? And when you touch it, it only actuates it for a couple seconds. We'll do lift front right. Right, so I would do this in steps. The older cars, you can hold it for as long as you want to raise it or lower it. But when I'm moving it manually, I'm not moving it to a calibrated level. I'm just moving it to where I want to move it. I don't even know why I chose to calibrated. All right, level control valves, which is this guy, okay? So if I was going to want to test the wiring, I would do this. Okay, there's the air from the line I took loose from the strut, all right? That's what happened there. Same thing for all of them, right? So if you had a circuit fault code and you wanted to check to see if you're getting power at here, you would check the wires on the connector for power and ground when you're activating this to see if you have it. And if you have it, you know the wiring is good to the module and the module is good. All right, damping valves, those are the shocks we were talking about, the valves on the sides of the shocks. And you're not replacing those, you're replacing the whole shock. You can't get those separate. So with these guys, you would just hear it clicking, maybe. But on top of that, it just shows a amperage draw. That's how it knows if it's working or not. So F3. Yeah, I don't hear anything. Oh, wait. I did hear it. I did hear it subtly. I'm not sure if you heard it on the camera, but it did make the noise. So that's a way to check it and test it at the connector. Now, when it says Y51 is the left front solenoid valve. And then Y52 is the right front. But on each valve itself, because there's two solenoids in there, you have a Y1 and a Y2. See the Y1 and the Y2? It's for the dampening. So if you hit the shock button and one light lights up, you're actuating, we'll say Y1. And when you hit it for the second light, you're actuating Y2. So if you had a fault code for either Y1 or Y2 or all two or both of them, if it's for both of them, you know the wiring's probably unplugged or the ground is bad since it shares ground or shares power. I'm sorry, I'd have to look at the wiring diagram to verify. But if you have a code for just one, it could be a problem with the wiring going to the connector or still a solenoid. But basically, I'm telling you why it's showing you Y1 and Y2, because Y51 is the left front shock solenoid. And then in it is Y1 and Y2, which are the two different valves. So now let's go to fill suspension struts. Why would I do this? Is because if I'm putting a new bag in, before I lower the car, I want to put just a little bit of pressure into it to take up the space so that way it doesn't fall out, right? So now since I have the left front line loose, I can actuate this and you'll hear the air come out. Hear it? Okay. And now because I'm going to change both front struts because of the left run's bad and it's got 80,000 miles on it, we're going to let the air out of the right front one. And you'll hear it come out of the intake pipe. The same line that sucks in air is the same one that releases air. Hear it come out. So I'm letting it go until there's 0 bar, or as close to 0 bar. 1 bar is 14.7 psi. So right now we're getting closer. Normally they're adjusted for the air pressure. So since our air pressure is about 14.7 psi, it should show 0, where some sensors may show 1 because we're at the air pressure of 14.7, but air is coming up less and less. And then you can see the millimeters are changing because the strut is getting smaller, right? So we're lowering the strut. Okay. I know I'm dragging this on here, but just trying to show you that's what we would do to let the air pressure out, or I just take the line loose. So one of the two. So that's all the actuations. Now, in the actuate, what did I miss here? Live data. You can see battery voltage, just to let you know the module's seeing. You can have a car putting out correct voltage, but the module is not seeing it. Either the wire going to the module has poor power on it, or the module is bad and it's reading the wrong voltage. Okay, so it's telling you that it's outputting 5 volts to the sensors and it's getting the right battery voltage if I confirm it with the battery. Status of the control unit. Lock position. All right, so let me talk about this real quick. In a lot of other air suspension systems, you have to turn them off. So when you raise it, the system doesn't work, so it doesn't cause an issue. Mercedes have software built in, so it knows that if all 4 level sensors change and the value is beyond what it should be, it knows the car is raised, right? The only time it doesn't is if you jack up the front of the car and the back is low, it'll adjust it. So when you lower the car from like a jack, it'll change. But once all 4 wheels are off the ground, it notices it and it puts it in a lock position to where it doesn't allow the suspension system to work. Another thing you need to know is that anytime I have the scanner plugged in and I'm in the Airmatic module, the car is not going to work on its own. It's waiting for me to tell it what to do with the scanner. So if you just fix something, right, and you have the scanner hooked up and it's still not working, shut the car off, unplug the scanner, get out of the module, unplug the dongle, get out of the diagnostics, lock the car, unlock the car, start it back up, and it should work how it should work, right? So anytime you're in the module, just know it's locking function out, almost like an AC module would do if you ever try to diagnose an AC module or AC panel. Once you're plugged into there, the buttons don't really work. It's waiting for you to tell it what to do with the scanner. So just keep that in mind, okay? That's what lock position means. We can see the level sensor voltages, right, which I just showed you before when I messed with the level sensors. Okay, so if we're going to diagnose a level sensor, I can go to this screen. I can disconnect the arm from the control arm, and I can move the arm from the sensor all the way up and all the way down and watch. If it has a nice smooth motion and it doesn't drop out and the numbers don't go crazy, we got a good sensor. But if you're moving it nice and slow and the readings start going all crazy, that's a bad sensor. Vehicle level, I don't know what this means. I'll tell you right now, because I don't know what it's saying millimeter from what. because when I read the millimeters from my measuring tape, we're at 470 millimeters, right? So like, I don't know what it's saying millimeter from. I never even cared about this screen because when we do adjust the calibration, we have a Ramus gauge that shows the angle. I use that. So man, I hate telling you that I'm a master tech and I've been with Mercedes for 20 years. They don't tell us what this means, so I don't know. Value of the pressure sensors, just what you can read, right? We have no pressure in there because I just let it out. And the sensor is built into here, just so you know. So if you got a problem with that, you're replacing a valve block. So if the compressor wasn't working for some reason, you can go into here and it would tell you, yes, you know, and look how many hours this thing has worked. I'm sorry, how many seconds. And we can actually reset this, I believe. I'm not sure with this scanner, but now this value from CAN, it's just the values from the other modules. Like I told you, all the doors and hood have to be closed in order for this thing to work. So it's reading the data from those modules via CAN. So if you had a door that wouldn't show it was closed, guess what? Your aromatic's not going to work. If you had a tailgate that doesn't show closed, guess what? Your aromatic's not going to work. So it's very important that even if you have no codes, you need to read actual values to see why the system wouldn't work. So CAN output signals are basically from the switch in the center console. It goes through CAN data to the module to know if it's being pushed or not. All right, so all this is a central filling valve, aka storage tank, and the valve is in here for the storage tank. Anytime it says Y36, this is Y36. I'm sorry, Y36.6 is what this is called. Y5 is solenoid 5 in here. So there's going to be 6 solenoids in there, and there's going to be one sensor, which is going to be called B. In fact, let's go back there and see Y36, which is this, B1, it's the sensor that's in there. All right, oh, we already did that. The pressure relief valve. If it was working, we can read the live data from that, which we just did in the actuation screen. Same thing with the damping valves unit. It'll show us the amps, right? If it was working. Level control valves, it's this guy here. It's no different than the actuation screen. This is just showing actual values, which are useless because it's not going to work unless we are using it with the scanner. And the pressure, which we know should be nothing. Yep, because we let it all out. So that's everything you can see. And I'll tell you, this A30M, man, it reads everything like the dealer scanner can, and it's very inexpensive, and it's pretty cool. So that's everything you would see in the suspension module. So I hope that helps with that. Level calibration. I touched on it earlier in the video. Ideally with level calibration, what you want to do is use the scanner, raise and lower the car however you got to get to 2.5 volts on each sensor. Once you get to 2.5 volts, measure with measuring tape all 4 corners. You're not comparing the front to the rear, right? Because the front or the rear may be a little bit higher or lower depending on the car, but you want the side to side to compare. So if both fronts are matching in millimeters or inches, however you want to read it, and the sensors are at 2.5, I'm happy with that. If the sensors are at 2.5 and both fronts don't match, tweak the brackets or the sensors a little bit to get them to match, right? But do that after you calibrate it, right? So when you enter calibration, I'm not going to do that on this car, and I don't want to go through it on this car. I'll do another video specifically on level calibration when I have a car that I can jack up and mess with. So I don't want to waste time on a customer's car with that. But it's going to want you to set it to a reading, right? So what I do first is I go to the manual adjustment and I raise and lower the car where I want it. Then I enter level calibration. When I enter level calibration, it tells me to adjust it where I want it. I already got it there, so I'm happy. So I hit enter. The next screen wants you to input the inclination degrees or reading. And it gives you a bracket of where the lowest and the highest is. So what I do is divide right down the middle. So if it, like I showed you on the paper before, if it says the reading is between, oh, and pay attention to the minus and the plus, right? If there's no minus, it's positive degrees. If there's a minus, it's negative degrees. So you have to know the difference and the sweep in between. So if it says between minus 1.0 and minus 1.6, there's 6/10 difference between 1 and 1.6. So I would set it at 1.3, minus 1.3, which is right in between, which is right where 2.5 volts should roughly be. And the module will be happy and allow you to enter calibration mode and pass calibration mode. So I hope that helps. Please do not reach out to me in comments asking me to help you with calibration mode, because it's not hard once you understand what you're trying to do, but it's such a pain in the butt. Because there's a lot of factors involved, like I just said, the level sensors, the angle of them, depending on the scanner you use, some may show the right degrees. I have this one here. I helped the guy calibrate with this one here, and this is an awesome scanner, the Creator Elite Mercedes-Benz. This thing does almost everything the dealer one can do within regards to programming and doing keys. It can do a lot, but the screen is so small that you couldn't read the numbers, right? So we had the voltages right and the millimeters right. We just kept playing with the numbers to see if it would eventually pass, and it finally passed. Now, once you pass it, if the level is slightly off, again, just tweak the sensors. Don't keep going back into calibration mode. Just you can physically alter the position of the sensors, which will trick the car and make it raise or lower. So what I like to do is put the adjustment leaks on there, and you can just twist the adjustment leaks instead of bending brackets and all that stuff, right? So I hope that helps you get out of calibration mode if you're in calibration mode. But two things need to be done. One, you got to have a scanner to do it. And two, a lot of patience, man. A lot of trial and error, okay? Now, when we do this at the dealer, it's flawless because we're on the alignment machine. We're on plates that can slide and move. And I have an angle meter that when you put it to the control arm, it shows you the angle on a little screen. And then we put that into the computer and the scanner, and it allows it to pass it, right? So good luck with that if you enter calibration mode, and I hope this helps you get out of it, you know? So let's see. I'm not even sure there's anything else to touch on. Let me double check. The Airmatic control module. All right. I can't tell you that in my 20 years, I've ever had a bad Airmatic control module, right? Just know that if you swap the module with a used one, it'll work. They don't have to be programmed, right? There's no software that needs to be programmed in there. And I pause there because I'm trying to think if I ever had to, and I don't. It's like we call it a generic module or a slave module. It just works. You plug it in and you just tell it what car it's in, and it knows how to work. There's really no software to update. It already has software built into it, is what it is. The only thing you have to know is that when you put a new module in it, you do have to go through level calibration and the adjustment procedure if it's brand new. If it's not brand new and you put in a used one, whatever was stored in the other car, your car is going to act that way. All right, so just know that. The biggest problem I see with the SUVs is that they get water in them. They get water through the doors, they get water through the sunroof, they get water through the hatch tubing, they get water through the tail lights, and the Airmatic module is under the seat, under the carpet, under the floor, in a huge cavity. Water fills up in there. I am almost certain I touched on everything with the Airmatic specifically to this car. If you have an S-Class, there's not much difference in diagnosing it. The only difference is how they fail or what commonly fails. The struts are typically bad. The tops rot out. The valve block is what lets air in and out. On the E-Classes and CLS, the early ones, the valve block did all the work. On later ones, you'll see there's electrical connectors on the struts. So basically, if there's an electrical plug-in on the strut, that's not the valve at the bottom and it's towards the top, it's the strut that lets the air in and out. All right. If there's no electrical connection, well, then error only comes from the valve block, right? So I hope that makes sense and is easier to diagnose. So in helping diagnose if there's a leak or an electrical fault. One thing that's typical to happen is when you replace something, you hurry up and jam in the plug and it bends the pins in there. So be nice and careful when you plug everything back in. As far as the ABC cars, it's almost identical. As far as fault codes, if there's a fault code, the system's not going to work. If it says ABC malfunction, visit workshop, the system's not going to work. So almost everything I showed today, besides jumping the compressor, you can't jump the hydraulic pump, right? It's almost verbatim the same diagnosis with the level sensors, the acceleration sensors. You're just not dealing with error. You're just dealing with hydraulic fluid. The only difference is the pump. There's not much more. There's actually less components because of the pump. But man, I hope this helps. If you have things that I didn't touch on the video, let me know, and I'll do a follow-up one for that. Let me leave that as the closer for this, right? If you found this helpful, hit me with a like, hit me with a subscribe. Check out my other videos. There's things that I do in my day-to-day that I work on stuff that I don't know what you need to know. So I'm just trying to share with you my experience, my knowledge. One thing I will tell you that you find in my videos when I work on cars, fender covers, man. It irks me when I see videos out there of well-known guys that pop out of trunks and yell at you on the screen. They wear keys, they wear jewelry. We don't do that, man. Professionals don't do that. I'm not banging a ring of janitor keys against your car when I'm working on it. I'm using fender covers. I have fender covers on the rotor so I don't get dirty, so I don't get the inside of the car dirty. I'm wearing gloves. I want to live a long, healthy life, man. Adopt some of these things in your day-to-day working on cars. Take care of your car. Take care of the customer's cars. I use fender covers for everything. When I walk into the dealer where I used to work, and if these guys are watching it right now, they know the first thing I say is, where's your fender cover? Man, it's just the little bit things you got to get into the habit of doing that make you just a little bit better yourself each day, right? So, hey, man, thanks for letting me ramble. Thanks for watching. Thanks for viewing. Thanks for hanging out with me for a little bit. If you're listening to me while you work or whatever it is, I hope I help some way, shape, or form. My name is Lou. Thanks for watching the Master Tech Lou channel. Hit me with a super thanks if you appreciated this or whatnot. If not, hey, man, whatever. Take care. Hope to see you next time.